So as we look to global digital transformations here at Thirdstage, one of the regions that we're focusing heavily on in recent months and years is in the Middle East and Northern Africa. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Thirdstage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformations. I'm here with Ash Ali, who's our VP of MENA, Middle East and Northern Africa. Thanks for joining today, Ash.
No, thank you very much, Eric.
So, Ash, we do a lot of transformations across the world. You and I have worked together for a while, and we made the strategic decision to move into MENA and really focus on clients in that area, given some of the demands that we have for our services there. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the region in general as it relates to digital transformation? Maybe things that are a little bit different or unique to the MENA market as it relates to digital transformation and ERP projects?
I mean, I'll refer back to first with what the region currently is going through, which we're going to title it an Industry 4.0. The move right now, I think we're in very interesting times, in terms of what ERPs are capable of, what we thought they were capable of 10 years ago. So the region there, I think what separates a lot from when comparing it here to the US, for example, that you have a lot of environments that are recent to a huge extent. If we take SAP, that people are now 2 years later after implementing SAP, are looking at the 2025 dead date, that now everybody's on their own. So the push here is a little bit different compared to there, that they're very much prime, that they have no history behind their landscapes, they're very clean. But now it's a matter of looking at that landscape and saying, okay, it's strong on its own, it's not very old, but now how do we expand it to enjoy all of the features that are now available compared to 4 or 5 years ago when they deployed? So, even to take it to a business standpoint, they've achieved their ROI on what they did their initial investment on. The implementations, the money put into them, knock on wood, they are very robust landscapes. And again, prime to be extended.
Right.
So, I guess, and I don't want to use the word maturity as much as lack of pollution, that the region hasn't had to face that. Investments were there again 4 or 5 years ago, so that foundation's there.
And now they're just trying to move, kind of migrate to the next level or advance what they've already invested in? Is that?
Well, that's the next, I think, the motivation. That's
right.
the great question to ask, now moving to that the economy is global. It used to be that in the Middle East, I think many companies owned their market, whether it was in the GCC or Northern Africa or any of the regions within that Middle East, North Africa region. But now the push is taking everything global. And I could say it again, after spending time there, that they have the ability and the technology to go global. That now it's a matter of, again, going through Industry 4.0 and enjoying all those features that are now available. And I'm using the word features, but architecture, connecting things the right way.
Right.
Doing it the right way, that you have now that, I like cars, so taking it to that fast Porsche sort of state. And these were very, again, using cars, very reliable cars, but prime to go to that next level. So business would be that motivating sort of push. And then we can call it best of breed resulting solutions. Creating something that, yes, is SAP based or Dynamics 365 based or Oracle to a certain extent. And just being able not to face the many obstacles many of our clients face here, but now being able to deal with that biggest risk of making sure that you're setting it up in that best way. And we use the word best practices, so I'm not going to use that.
Right.
That's a very loose term, but something specific to their industry, not customizing something when it's available.
Right.
So those pitfalls, which I think we'll definitely have opportunities to talk about this later, but implementing it the right way. But I think that's a long way around saying that they're prime for it.
Right.
And being the motivation, going into that global economy very strong. And when I say going into it, by the way, I mean taking a leadership approach.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned SAP, you mentioned Oracle, D365. When we look at the vendor landscape in the area, in the region, globally, you mentioned the three big ones, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft. Those are kind of the top three in terms of market share globally. But when we look at MENA, in terms of not just the software that's available, but the types of ecosystems that are there to support those different products, how does it vary, if at all, for the MENA region?
Well, for those that have gone through it, I think everybody who, again, we know it very well, and those that have gone through it in the Middle East know it, that there's one thing to have the product, but the implementation firm that's going to do it is a consulting firm at the end of the day. The majority of these products don't have an in-house, you're buying SAP, you're not getting the SAP consultants from the SAP big headquarter building. So going back to what you asked, the vendor community there, compared to the vendor community, again, we'll do a comparison with the US, it's a much different community in the sense that qualifications are not strictly applied. Here when I see a gold partner, it's going to be doing an SAP implementation for me, there's a certain degree of vetting I need to do, but the foundation's there. I know that they've done it before, that this is an area that they concentrate in.
They have credibility.
Exactly, that's the magic word, credibility. But now, comparing it to the Middle East, it's not that straightforward to find that. I mean, again, I've been doing it, in the region. Selection becomes critical. That selection process, vetting, that what we call the SI, that solution implementation partner. It's not straightforward like here. So the vendor community is still very, I want to use the word, again, maturity, that the maturity level's low, but they're encouraged by that because there's no force that's forcing them to raise the bar.
Right.
So that puts the client in a situation of vulnerability. I mean, they could now, they don't, rightfully so, know what to look for by saying, I want to implement an ERP. I see the potential in doing it. But there it's a very, very dangerous minefield when it comes to picking that right vendor.
Right.
And I've been through it as recent as 2 years ago, being in an area where I thought it would never be an issue, in Abu Dhabi. In the UAE, the maturity of vendors and firms they've raised the bar very high. But again, we're talking about ERPs. It's a niche that has a lot of assumptions that I go on somebody's website and they say that they do SAP, they do Dynamics 365 and Oracle. We're going to say, okay, wait, these are pretty massive differences in terms of expertise, but there's nobody holding them accountable.
Right.
So I don't know if I give that way too much of a long answer, but it's an area I'm very sensitive to.
It's more than just picking a vendor then. I mean, we've got to look at, let's just say, Oracle's, we're leaning towards Oracle because we think the product itself is a good fit, but we need to go that extra step and say, well, let's make sure we have a good partner that knows the software that can help us implement it. Is that
exactly?
What you're saying?
And we know it because we live it.
Right.
It's one thing to choose, but it's a whole different world in terms of implementing. The choice is, there's no easy part to it, but that implementation, it's not turning a plug on. Every project's different. And there's a magic simple word, when it comes to picking somebody, that repeatability. It's not enough on its own, but for me, when I'm selecting a solution implementation partner for a client, that repeatability, one of the biggest things we vet, and you're very much accustomed to it, is the due diligence we do to make sure that, wait, this could be the first time you're doing it in this specific environment. That's fine. But in terms of repeatability, that, what you mentioned before, the credibility, that, again, is that crust of it.
Right. So when we think about then, there's two phases here, or two aspects we're talking about. We're talking about selecting both a product, the software or softwares for a company, and also the system integrator or the technical resources to help implement it. So there's that stage of it. And then you also mentioned that there's the implementation aspect too. How do we implement the product and how do we make sure we have the right resources to help implement? Now one of the reasons that we as a company at Thirdstage decided to move into the market is because we felt like there was a void there. There's an unmet need in the space, in the consulting space. So what are some of those things that lead you to see the opportunity for companies like Thirdstage to help in the area?
That's a very good point. We always look at it, from an application lifecycle management. Let's look at it from a structure standpoint. Even if I start just with that, before going into the long additional needs or steps to implement the right way, I don't want to say the word rarity, but it's difficult to find that comfort zone with a lot of the firms. So, but kind of going back to what I think the crust of maybe the question is the vendors there, who exists, and I'm going to put it as devil's advocate, like if I'm a customer looking, what vendors exist to help me as a client pick the right system? Now, when I open that door in terms of vendors, yes, I'm going to find vendors claiming to be specific to SAP, Oracle, D365, Infor, talking about not only the tier 1, you can go to tier 2. There's no shortage of those claiming or skilled to be able to deploy those specific systems. But to find, that support, to be able to find a firm that's not leaning to one certain product or being able to provide that application lifecycle to say that, look, from a way to deploy, a way to implement, this is the way you do it. It's not very easy to find. And on certain parts of that, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, you cannot find it. So you're, again, dealing with challenges that don't necessarily exist here.
Right. What other trends or considerations do you see, besides what we've talked about so far, that are unique to the area? We've talked about the lack of maturity of the ecosystems that support these different products. You mentioned Industry 4.0 becoming a little bit more global. Any other trends or thoughts that you see in the space that's unique to MENA?
I mean, that's a kind of a long list. And I mean that in a beautiful way. These are two different markets, two different cultural markets as well. But I think, part of me wants to say the expertise and skill set, but part of me doesn't want to say that because you do have amazing skill sets. Again, I've been there for 8 years. But, whether I'm looking at D365 again, the same three that I'm always going to say, but there's all the others next to it. You'll find amazing skill sets. So that's why a huge part of me doesn't want to say that. But again, going back to that Industry 4.0, you need to be able to benchmark, what, this best of breed, sort of environment exists. Now that might be in the US, that might be in parts of Europe, and it might be in parts of the Middle East. But being able to know it exists, and I know that's a little bit generic, but being able to have seen it, to say that, in a complex manufacturing environment, putting in a Kanban, sort of lean manufacturing environment, walking the floor and knowing what needs to happen from a business standpoint, but also always relating it, our curse, to what the systems we're aware of, the systems that, because our breath is, knock on wood, I wish I could say I was still a kid, but again, being through all these different systems, we're always relating it to what the system can do. There, it might be difficult to be able to benchmark. Some might have seen it happen, but again, it's those environments that haven't been seen, where the key becomes, again, going back to what we mentioned, yes, I want to implement XYZ system, or I want to select this ERP system. And that bigger question, what is that system going to do? And when I say what it's going to do, to give you that competitive edge. At the end of the day, no matter how, and yes, people hear what we do, it's a good way to go to sleep.
Right.
But it's the end game of it, and I think many firms forget, is to have that company make more money. It really can't be more simplistic than that. Now, whether I'm talking about efficiency gains, opening up new channels of sales, enabling e-commerce, whatever it is, these are the things that, it's not, and again, I don't want to go to something different that can be a whole conversation, but it's not technology driven. So kind of relating it back to what you asked, if I'm in that kind of environment and go in knowing that the challenge is maybe the newness of this for the client, it's going to be an extremely new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to organizational change management, everything that kind of relates back to the implementation. That newness, again, of it, if that's a word.
Right.
That's maybe a big, from a different standpoint. And it's a plus, not a negative. Because, again, going back to what we mentioned, there's no polluted, the pollution of the environment. It's almost a canvas that you can do so much with, just don't screw it up.
Right.
So, don't know if that answers, but.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points.
So I'm sorry, it was a long answer.
No, that's all right. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for
it's my pleasure.
your time here. I've included contact information for both Ash and I in the links below if you'd like to talk about your digital transformation or your potential project in MENA or anywhere else in the world. We've included our contact information below. I also include a link to download our 2020 ERP report, which is a good place to start if you're looking for some general tips and best practices for how to select and implement ERP technology in the new coming years. So thank you very much for your time. Hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.